You know, when I saw who was playing Eugene in this episode, I was wondering if his last wish before he died was going to be wanting to have some steak. Hello, interwebs! I hope you are all doing well, and I am here to review the latest episode of The Last of Us Season 2. This one, the penultimate episode of the season, titled The Price. Just to say it right up front, if you did not watch my Doctor Who review, I said this there, but I'll put it up here as well, especially because it actually will inform my perspective of this episode a little bit down the line. Apologies for this episode being a little bit later than I usually post this review. I usually try to post it up the night the episode comes out, but I was actually back home this weekend visiting family. My sister graduated this weekend from her undergrad, but also I went back to meet my brand new, newly born nephew that I have not met before. He's only 2 months old. He was absolutely adorable, and I am a brand new aunt for the first time, so it was very exciting for me on many, many different levels to see two different milestones in my siblings' life, because my brother had the kid and my sister was graduating, and I'm getting married in the near future, so, you know, I'm just getting older. These are the things that happen. But I say all that not just to let you know why this episode's late, but to also say that my experience with meeting my nephew, I was kind of surprised, influenced my reaction to this episode a little bit. Because, and I'll put this up front, this episode I really, really enjoyed. And what was fascinating about this one is that it kind of turned back to center on Joel's perspective as we get a flashback to the years leading up to his death and ultimately what was the rift between him and Ellie. With many of this episode's moments, as directed by the game director Neil Druckmann, he's the one who sort of wrote and directed the video games, this episode pulling right from the video games in a lot of respects, outside of a couple notable moments where it doesn't. And the fact that, you know, we're not fully taken out of Ellie's perspective. There are moments where we get to see where she is coming from here, but this one really wanted us to understand where Joel came from and to get his perspective as a surrogate father to Ellie and how he was feeling and how he was feeling protective of her and how he felt as a father. And what's interesting to me is that when I initially played the video game, both the original Last of Us and The Last of Us Part 2, even though it's not that much, you know, I guess The Last of Us Part 2 is like 5 years old at this point, but I remember identifying much more with Ellie and identifying with her feelings of hurt and pain and anger at Joel. And I still do. I understand exactly why she feels hurt by him as we get at the end of the episode. But having just met my nephew and seeing my brother, who I grew up with, being a dad now and taking care of this kid, you know, not that I've not understood a parent like loving a child, but I have a different perspective on it. It's just interesting because getting to hold him and be like, this is the kid of my brother who I grew up with, and I would protect this kid with everything that I have, as I know he would. And I kind of understand him a little bit more now. Not that I necessarily agree with his choices, and not that I necessarily disagreed or didn't understand his choices before, but I identify a little bit more with him than I've ever have before, which was just an interesting experience. I've had an interesting emotional reaction to all of the different versions of this story, both the TV show and movie, and the different times that it came at me in my life. So, you know, when I first watched the video game version of the final scene where they're on the porch, I was fully on Ellie's, like in Ellie's perspective, not necessarily side, but I was in her perspective. Because again, I don't necessarily agree or disagree with Joel, but I understand him now more, and I was in more his perspective, which is very interesting. Because again, this episode is very much from his perspective, whereas in the game, many of these moments, not all of them, but many of these moments are much more rooted in Ellie's perspective. And again, we do get Ellie's perspective here as well, but we get a lot more. I think from Joel's perspective we do in the game necessarily. But a lot of these are recreating this one for one. Jumping into some specifics, I will say Bella Ramsay throughout this episode nails younger Ellie. And I had forgotten how good they were as younger Ellie. And it kind of made me recognize why Ellie isn't 100% clicking for me this season. And it is because I think she feels like she needs to be a little bit older, like she is in the game, whereas Bella is still, I think, kind of in between, where just as an actor and presence-wise, and this is nothing against them personally, but I think they were a perfect fit in season 1 for Ellie. And fuck all the people, by the way, I'm just going to say this right up front, fuck all the people being transphobic or, hating on Bella Ramsay, saying, they're terrible cast as Ellie. Like, no, I think they were perfect in season 1 and, nailed Ellie to a T. But I think what the bad faith people, but even myself, are reacting to a little bit just subconsciously is just, I think they are a little bit young for where Ellie should be in this game. And this episode, or in this season, and I think this episode really showed that to me. But to its credit, having tracked the journey of Ellie over these 5 years, to now see where Bella has landed in portraying Ellie in the rest of the season, now makes me feel a little bit more on board. And I wonder if I went back and rewatched some of the rest of the season that has already aired, if I would be a little bit more into Bella's performance as Ellie, now having tracked this version of the character a little bit better. And I think it'll land more, especially last week's episode. I think I got a little bit of flack in the comments last week because some people, I said I didn't fully connect or buy Ellie sort of turn to the dark side and beating Nora to death at the end of last week's episode. And I think that's part of why. It's just I haven't been tracking this Ellie and haven't been able to invest in this Ellie as well as the game version. And I think part of that was also Ellie being we can go back, Dina, we can go back. We don't need to do this. You're pregnant. We can go back, which the game Ellie wasn't as much, did have moments of that, but not as much. But I think also part of it is just the, just age and performance of Bella. So I wonder if that moment will land a little bit better for me as it did for other people last week, after watching this episode. But yeah, I think, Bella nails it. And I love, again, this sense of how much Joel is a dad. And you see the work that he goes through to be a good dad to Ellie, and he is a good dad, on the whole. And I love that opening scene that we get with his dad, the cop, and you do get the sense that Joel did come from an abusive household, and does not want to be his father. And I kind of like that. He recognized, you see why he is a protector. You see why he protected his brother since he was a little kid. He is a guy who wants to protect others, will do anything to protect others, beat the crap out of people to protect others, even from his own father, even from people that are around him in his life. But also the sort of, hurt people sort of thing as well. And overriding, Ellie's desires for his need to protect people that kind of came from that sort of environment. So it's a really complicated dynamic that I think that scene just instantly nails, and really gets you into why Joel is this kind of dad. And it brings it full circle at the end. We say, I hope you do a little bit better than me at the end. Ugh. Just punched me in the gut. That final scene when Pedro just nails that emotion so hard and just guts me when I watched it. I was crying, and I've seen that version of that scene from the game, but I really loved this one. From just the arc of all this. And I think it also speaks to the fact that we're getting all of these in the game. Just, this isn't really a spoiler at this point because you've now seen all of them. But in the game, these flashbacks are kind of parsed more throughout the season instead of all at once. And I think that works for the game. But unlike the changes that they've made from the game for this season in other respects, mostly around Abby, which I have not liked, here I like it in the sense that it makes sense adaptationally. It probably makes more sense just for Pedro Pascal's schedule. But I also think it allows you to track his arc a little bit more satisfyingly than you would in the game, and sort of getting it a little bit more all at once. And I think it really lands. It might throw off the momentum of the season a little bit in terms of jumping back for an episode where you're gaining into the finale of the season. However, I think it really, really works in my estimation. And you really can track the degradation of this relationship between these two, because that moment where you see how good a dad he is and how much Ellie does love him. Like that moment, and they love each other, that moment like doing the space sequence, which is really beautiful. Though I think plays a little bit faster in the show than it does in the game. Like the game I think lingers a little bit more on that moment, and I kind of wish it had. The show seems to skip by a little bit faster than I recall. Maybe that's just my memory. But still very, very good, and just shows you what you can do with light, like simple lighting effects. It was very, very effective. But you can just see how much they do really care for each other and how good a dad Joel can be. And I really did, and you see the degradation of that. And that moment where Ellie like looks in Joel's face and sees him lie again about Eugene, played by the way, wonderful actor, love him. But like sees him lie again and knows that he can lie right to people's faces really, really well, and does it to Gale's face. And why that really like sort of breaks Ellie and gets her angry at him, at Joel, I thought like just really, really, really worked. And again, it was a heartbreaking moment where Eugene's like, I just want to see Gale. It's not for Gale, it's for me. I want this. I need it for me. And you see in Joel too how much he has taken away agency from people, not just for Eugene, but for Ellie. Because ultimately that is perhaps my biggest problem in universe, like not necessarily with the story, but in universe with the end of Last of Us Part 1, which is no one asks Ellie. Not Joel doesn't ask Ellie what she wants, but neither do the Fireflies. Neither does Marlene. No one asks Ellie at any point. And I think that would have alleviated a lot of stuff. It would at least been a conversation, you know, like in my mind, it's one of those things where like you wake Ellie up and say, hey, would you want to get this procedure? It would mean you die, but it might save people. And that would have probably helped Joel come to terms with it more. And Ellie at least get a say in that. And you could even make the argument from that point of being like, well, she's a kid. She doesn't get to consent. You know, obviously there's a whole stuff with that gets into complicated stuff, especially because I'm trans and they try to take away trans bodily autonomy, especially for kids. So there's a larger conversation, but no one bothers to have it with Ellie in the end of Last of Us Part 1. So, and I think that's ultimately my biggest thing. I'm like, that should have been the conversation that it was had. And I think, and that's fine. Like, that's fine as the story. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not negating, like, the story that was told with that is good, but that is the problem, I think, at the core of the decisions all of those characters make at the end of Last of Us Part 1. That you see Joel kind of realizing a little bit here, even if he does not apologize for it in really any regard. And it is kind of, again, it is heartbreaking where you have that, you know, unstoppable force meets an immovable object of who Joel is and who Ellie is. And that last little bit of her saying, you know, I would like the chance to try to forgive you, and the fact that you know that she's never going to get that is just gut-wrenching. It is absolutely gut-wrenching. And interesting that we're getting it at this point in the story, because in the game, again, without spoiling where, it comes later in just the timeline of when you get it in the game's story. So I'm curious to see, like, it lands for me here and works for me here. I am curious to see how it's going to affect the reaction to the rest of the show, because unlike stuff with Abby's backstory kind of getting revealed a lot earlier than it is in the game, which I think kind of negates some of the stuff that I like about the game personally for me. Your mileage may vary on that. This, I don't think, necessarily negates it, but it will change how people see and possibly view the rest of these moments in the season. And I actually think might make it land better where this story is going. And I think even rectify some of my issues with where Abby's backstory was placed in this season. In fact, getting people more on board with anger at Ellie, or anger at Abby for taking away Joel, especially from Ellie at this particular moment of their relationship. And I think that will sort of set us back up to being really against Abby. Again, not spoiling where that's going to go. But I think like that sort of takes back, that fixes a little bit of the problems that I've had with how this season has used Abby. And I'll leave it there. Ultimately, like I said, I really, really enjoyed this episode quite a lot. What did you think of it, though? I'd love to hear all your thoughts in the down below. But beyond all of that, I hope you, my friends, live long and prosper.